Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So today we're going to be going over the Sorceress, or the Sorcerer, or whatever you want to call it. I've been trying to make a video on every single one of these, and hopefully I get them all done before the end of beta, but we'll see. Basically, the Sorceress is your quintessential caster type character. And if we go over all of the Sorceress's abilities and talk about them, you'll get the idea of how her stuff works. But before we go over her abilities, let's talk about the most unique thing about her, which is the enchantment system. So the enchantment system allows her to choose specific abilities that will have a specific effect, which could potentially make her stronger or not. Like for instance, Spark has killing an enemy has a 10% chance to form a crackling energy. Firebolt has a direct damage from skills, applies an additional burning damage over 8 seconds. Frostbolt is direct damage from skills, applies up to a 15% chill, and so forth and so on. And each one of these abilities has a different enchantment effect, which could potentially equal some pretty crazy damage output. I was actually playing around a lot with the Firewall one, which allows you to spawn additional firewalls underneath of the target, which actually spawn at an X, by the way. For each instance of burning damage, there's a 5% chance to spawn the 2 firewalls, which is pretty darn cool. And I was having a lot of fun with that. But there's tons of different enchantment effects that you could potentially take advantage of. And you even have 2 enchantment slots, which when you hit level 30, at least you'll be able to put a second enchantment in. Which in this particular build, I would probably throw in the Firebolt for the additional burning damage, because each instance of burning damage is going to net me another chance to spawn more firewalls, which is what I want. Now, the Sorceress as a whole has obviously 3 trees, and it would be amiss if I didn't actually point this out. So she definitely has a fire tree, an ice tree, and a lightning tree. Okay, she does not have any other elements really than that. So she is fire, ice, and lightning. Now she does have 2 lightning attacks, and the Arc Lash is almost kind of more of like a melee ability than it is like a ranged attack, which is a little strange for a sorceress, considering she is, of course, a caster. But Firebolt allows you to have some pretty decent damage output. It's actually pretty good damage output. It applies a very nice burn effect on the target, and with the Firebolt pierces through enemies, you can hit multiple enemies at a time with it, which is actually really effective. And then, of course, you can also do the critical strikes with Firebolt, increase the burning damage you deal, or you can go with the extra mana generation from it when hitting a burning enemy, both of which are pretty nice. Arc Lash, on the other hand, is a small arc of lightning that appears in front of you, and every 10 times Arc Lash swipes, it stuns all enemies for 2 seconds, which is pretty cool. If you enhance it, you get the initial swipe critically strikes. It swipes an additional time. So Arc Lash gets a nice little extra attack if you can do the crits, which could be interesting for a crit build. Glinting Arc Lash, hitting a stunned enemy with Arc Lash reduces your cooldowns by 0.25 seconds. So this is an interesting option if you were trying to go with a massive cooldown reduction build. Then we also have Flickering Arc Lash, which is gain movement speed for 5 seconds per enemy hit with Arc Lash up to 18%, which could make it a very interesting ability to use for running away, escape. We also have Frostbolt, which is throw a bolt of frost at an enemy, dealing 111 to 136 damage and chilling them for 15%. Direct damage from skills applies up to a 15% chill. Now, the thing is that the 15% chill stacks, and once that reaches 100%, the monster will be frozen. All chilling effects stack on a monster. So if you hit monsters with multiple chilling effects, they will eventually be frozen. And of course, there's tons of ways that you can get additional damage and things like that from the frozen monsters. If they're frozen, like there's tons of effects throughout the tree that are like, if the monster's frozen, gain this amount of damage, tickle his butt hair. It'd probably snap off if it's frozen. Enhanced Frost Bolt has a 15% chance to explode on chilled enemies. Hitting surrounding enemies, chances increase to 100% against frozen enemies. Glinting Frostbolt. Frostbolt generates 4 mana when hitting chilled or frozen enemies. So again, what we were talking about before with the chilled or frozen enemy bonuses. Then we also have Frostbolt makes frozen enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. Then finally, we have the lightning generator, which is Spark. So launch a bolt of lightning that shocks an enemy 4 times, dealing 8% damage each. Killing an enemy has a 10% chance to form a crackling energy. Now, crackling energies, basically, from what I've been able to figure out, are these little balls that spawn on the ground, and when you collect them, that will pretty much damage anything nearby. In sequence, and you can collect up to, I think it's 10 of them, and they just continually damage enemies until they are all gone. I kind of wish they lasted longer, but they do seem to do pretty decent damage. Enhanced Spark. Each time a spark hits its primary target, has a 40% chance to hit up to 3 additional enemies. If there are no other enemies to hit, Spark instead deals 20% increased damage to its primary target. You can also choose between Flickering Spark, which is each time a spark hits an enemy has a 3% chance to form a crackling energy. And then Spark grants 2% increased critical strike cast per 5 seconds up to 8%. And that leads us into our core skills. So with our core skills, we have quite a few different abilities. First off, we have Incinerate, which is basically Inferno from Diablo 2. It's essentially like a flamethrower that comes out of the sorceress's hands. It's a channeling ability, which means you can't move around while you're using it. And it does have some interesting bonuses, like the ability to burn everything around you for 15% damage per second. You can also choose between every 4 seconds an enemy is hit by Incinerate, they are mobilized for 1 second, or enemies deal 20% less damage while burning from Incinerate. Fireball is also on the tree here, and Fireball is basically exactly as it sounds. You shoot it, it hits targets. It costs a lot of mana, though, and unfortunately that means that you really can't spam it very well. But it seems like they have it set up specifically to be more of a nuke ability than a spam ability. The enhancement allows Fireball to radius to increase based on the distance traveled up to 50%. And then on top of that, we also have Greater Fireball, which deals 10% of the burning damage if applied to enemies as additional direct damage. And this honestly seems to be the best way to deal with Fireball because I tested it out significantly. And if the monsters have a large amount of burning damage on them when you fire Fireball, it will annihilate targets. However, if you fire it and you don't have any burning damage on the targets, it doesn't seem to do anywhere near as much. The other option is Destructive Fireball, which is Fireball's explosion. Critical strike damage is increased by 10% each enemy hit. It increases this bonus by 5% up to 25% total. We also have Frozen Orb, which is also pretty hefty on the mana cost, which unleashes a Frozen Orb that chills for 34%, expels Piercing Shards, dealing a total of 32% damage. Upon expiration, the Frozen Orb explodes, dealing a nice little Nova, just like in Diablo 2. Damaging and chilling enemies. It's not quite as easy to use as it is in Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, you would obviously use it over and over and over again, aiming it correctly so that the Nova explodes within the targets. This one seems to be more of a use it when you have the mana kind of ability, and you can't really use it all the time. The enhancement for it, when cast above 50 mana, Frozen Orb's explosion damage is increased by 30%. You can also choose between Frozen Orb's explosion has a 25% chance to make all enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Frozen Orb always makes frozen enemies vulnerable. And then also Frozen Orb's explosion restores 5 mana when hitting a frozen enemy. We also have Ice Shards, which this one is actually pretty good. Launch 5 Ice Shards that deal 79 to 97, 25% damage each. Deals 25% increased damage to frozen enemies, so more damage if the monsters are frozen. Enhanced Ice Shards. Ice Shards have a 40% chance to ricochet to another enemy. Ice Shards always ricochet off of frozen enemies, which is pretty cool. While you have a barrier active, casts of Ice Shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. And then hitting an enemy with 5 Ice Shards is a single cast makes them vulnerable for 2 seconds. We also have a couple passives here. So we've got your maximum mana is increased. Core skills deal 3% increased damage, but when cost above 50 mana. Cast above 50 mana. Potent Warding. After casting non-basic skill, you gain a 2% resistant to all elements and 1% additional resistant to that skill's element for 3 seconds. And then we also have Frost Nova. Not Frost Nova. Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is pretty cool. It does pretty much the same thing that it does in Diablo 2. bouncing off of enemies, but it also apparently bounces off of you, which is a whole other thing. Recently, Chain Lightning got nerfed a little bit, but it's still a decent ability. Enhanced Chain Lightning, it gains a 3% increased critical strike chance per bounce. Then we also have, if Chain Lightning bounces off of you, it deals 10% increased damage. And then when Chain Lightning critically strikes, it has a 25% chance to form one of those beautiful crackling energies. We also have Charged Bolts, which is release 5 bolts of lightning that course along the ground in an erratic pattern, dealing 28% damage each. When you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release 3 charge bolts from them. Hitting an enemy at least 3 times with the same cast of charge bolts releases a lightning nova, dealing 24% damage to enemies around them. Charge bolts deal 25% increased damage to stunned enemies, or hitting an enemy with charge bolts reduces their damage dealt by 20% for 3 seconds. I'm interested to give this another shot. There are definitely some legendaries that can make charge bolts more powerful as well, so keep an eye out for those. We also have Flame Shield, which engulf yourself in flames for 2 seconds, burning surrounding enemies for 40% damage per second. You can activate the Flame Shield, grants 25% movement speed while active bonus. And then also the Flame Shield heals you for 50% of your missing life, which is pretty amazing. And you gain 25% mana cost reduction from Flame Shield if you want to go with that instead. We also have the Teleport ability, which is on a cooldown of 11 seconds. And basically you transform into lightning, you become unstoppable, and you move pretty fast in a specific direction, obviously. It's kind of like an evade. You can enhance it by reducing the cooldown by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit, up to 3 seconds. You can also choose between after teleporting gain 30% damage reduction, or for 4 seconds after teleporting, crackling energy hits 2 additional enemies. We have 2 passives on this tree. Glass Cannon, which increases your damage, but increases the damage that you take. And Elemental Attunement, which is critical strikes have up to a 5% chance to reset your cooldown on one of your defensive skills. Can only happen once every 10 seconds. Ice Armor, which is pretty good. As you can see, I have points in it. Barrier of Ice forms around you for 6 seconds, absorbing 33% of your base life. While Ice Armor is active, 5% of your damage dealt is added to its barrier. You can choose between the, while Ice Armor is active, your mana regeneration is increased by 25%, which is pretty cool. Shimmering Ice Armor, enemies that hit you while Ice Armor is active have a 15% chance to become frozen for 3 seconds. And also, damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 50% more to Ice Armor's barrier. Then finally we have Frost Nova. And Frost Nova is actually pretty good at freezing enemies. Unleashes a torrent of frost, freezing enemies around you for 3 seconds. It is a very nice, obviously circular AoE attack. You can also kill enemies frozen by Frost Nova, reduces its cooldown by 1 second, up to 4 seconds per cast. So if you actually kill something, you can reduce the cooldown by 4 seconds, which isn't too bad. Mystical Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, increases to 6 seconds against bosses. Frost Nova generates 4 mana per enemy hit, which is actually a pretty good one. Then moving on to the Conjuration skills. So the Conjuration skills has a lot of passives in it. We have the deal 1% increased damage for each active Conjuration. We have you gain 1% damage reduction against elites for each second you haven't taken damage for up to 40%. Mana Shield, every time you spend 100 mana, you gain 5% damage reduction for 5 seconds. And then using a cooldown grants 10% of your maximum life as a barrier for 2 seconds. Then we have Precision Magic, which is your lucky hit chances increased by 5%. Now, I think this one is extremely powerful because when you max it out, you get a nice little 15% bonus to your lucky hit chance, which means that any lucky hit chance is automatically increased by quite a bit. Just to give you an example, if I take one of my points out of here, and you see that I have a 53% lucky hit chance here. I throw this in here, I get 5%. Now I'm at a 56% lucky hit chance. And basically, every single ability is going to increase a lucky hit chance for putting just 3 points in this, which I think is pretty powerful. Hydras are obviously very similar to the ones in Diablo 2. You put them on the ground. They have multiple heads. They fire little bolts at everybody. You can enhance them so that they will gain additional heads, as well as they can burn things. So they can add burning effects onto their damage type. Or you can also set it up so they critically strike, or after you critically strike, your Hydras gain 30% critical strike chance for 3 seconds. Hydras recently were the target of a little bit of a nerf, though, so they might not be as good as they were before in the beta. Ice Blades. Conjure a pair of Ice Blades for 6 seconds that rapidly slash enemies, damage and have 30% chance to make them vulnerable for 2 seconds. Enhanced Ice Blades cooldown is reduced by 0.5 seconds each time it hits a vulnerable enemy, which, is good because it's obviously going to make them vulnerable, which is very nice. Invoked Ice Blades. Your Ice Blades gain 10% increased attack speed per active Ice Blades. Or you can go with the 20% enhanced Ice Blades cooldown reduction is applied to your other skills. So that's pretty interesting. You could use Ice Blades to reduce the cooldown of all your other abilities. Lightning Spear was interesting. I actually played around with this one. It kind of like floats around you and seeks out targets. It's a little strange, but I mean, it kind of worked, and also I had it set up so that as I absorbed crackling energies, I just got more lightning spears. So every single time I was picking up crackling energy orbs, I would just keep getting more and more lightning spears, and they were just flying around attacking everything, which was pretty cool. You can set it up so that after critically striking, the lightning spear gains 5% increased stacking critical strike chance for its duration. Collecting crackling energy increases the damage of your next lightning spear cast by 20% up to 100. Or you can go with the lightning spear stuns enemies for 2 seconds when critically striking. And this brings us to the mastery skills, which has a lot of passives. So there's basically a passive tree for each element. We have the icy passive tree, which is increase in barrier duration. Lucky hit, frost skills have a 3% chance to instantly freeze. While you have a barrier active, you could apply 8% more chill. The fire tree gives you things like damage increase while healthy. You deal increased critical strike damage against burning enemies and double that against immobilized. And then crippling flames gives you the pyromancy, have 5% chance to immobilize enemies for 2 seconds. This chance is doubled while you are healthy. And then the lightning has similar things like critical strikes with shock kills have a 5% chance to form crackling energies. Every time you stun an enemy, you deal 46 to 56 lightning damage to them. Upon absorbing a crackling energy, you gain 4 mana. And in general, like each tree has its own set of passives here. We also have Blizzard, which is 39 mana cost, and it's very, very similar to the way that Diablo 2's Blizzard works. Summons a Blizzard over top of their heads. Over, what is it, like 8 seconds, it does a pretty decent amount of damage. You can enhance it by increasing the damage to frozen enemies by 25%. And then you can choose between when cast above 50 mana, Blizzard's duration is increased by 4 seconds, or while you have an active Blizzard, your core skills cost 10% less mana. Honestly, Blizzard's kind of interesting as an ability just so that you can spam it. One of the things I had an issue with the Sorceress was she just really doesn't have enough mana to be spamming a whole bunch of abilities. So you might want to mix and match mana abilities with cooldown abilities. Meteor, summon a meteor that strikes the target location, dealing 88% damage and burning the ground for 39% damage over 3 seconds. You can also grab the enhanced meteor. If a meteor is cast and it hits 3 or more enemies, there's a 30% chance an additional meteor will fall in the same location. Meteor's impact immobilizes enemies for 2 seconds, or you can do the meteors fall 30% faster. Firewall is rather interesting. It works pretty good, just like in Diablo 2. And you put that right underneath their feet, and they burn pretty nicely. You can enhance it by increasing the burning damage they take from you while standing in a firewall. So if they are standing in the firewall and you burn them with another ability, they get 25% more burning damage. Then you can choose between Mage's Firewall, which is enemies continue burning for 3 seconds after leaving the firewall. So this is pretty handy if you have a monster who likes to jump around a lot. We also have Wizard's Firewall, which is gain 5% increased mana regeneration per active firewall up to a 25%, which is actually pretty powerful. Ball Lightning is an odd ability, which I'm not really sure is going to work out or not. It's a ball that kind of like travels slowly toward the target, and it doesn't really quite work the way that it should. And I've messed around with it a lot, and I really can't quite get the good effect out of it. When you actually use it, you'll see exactly what I mean, because it just kind of just goes like, and it doesn't really do a whole lot of damage in a large area. The monster has to like almost literally be standing inside the ball as it travels, and it travels kind of, I want to say, too fast. You can enhance it by increasing the ball lightning's damage rate by 200% of your attack speed bonus. You can also choose between after hitting close enemies 50 times with ball lightning, your next class stuns. Or you can do if an enemy is hit at least 4 times by a cast of ball lightning, crackling energy is formed. It can only happen once per cast. Then we go to our ultimates, and in the ultimate tree we have a lot of passives. There is some pretty serious frost passives. We got the permafrost, increased damage to elites. You deal 3% increased damage to chilled enemies, 6% to frozen. You deal 4% increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies, and then frigid breeze, cold damage against vulnerable enemies, has up to a 20% chance to regenerate 5 mana. And then there's also a lightning part, which is hitting enemies with shock skills increases your critical strike chance by 1%. Resets upon getting a critical strike. Conduction, critical strikes with shock skills increase your movement speed by 3% for 3 seconds. Shock skills have up to a 3% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds. And then enemies deal 5% less damage for 5 seconds after being critically struck by your shock skills. So kind of focused around critical hits and shock skills here. For the ultimates themselves, or actually no, we got another set of passives, the fiery passives. Killing a burning enemy increases your mana regeneration by 10% for 3 seconds. After standing still for 1.5 seconds, your pyromancy skills cost 5% less mana. Warmth, every 1 second you heal for 0.3% of your maximum life for each nearby burning enemy. Healing increased to 0.6% from bosses. You deal increased burning damage to enemies for each second they remain burning, up to 5% after 5 seconds. So some nice burning passives there. As for the ultimates, we have Deep Freeze, which literally just freezes everything around you in a circle. You encase yourself in ice, becoming immune for 4 seconds, continually dealing 25% damage and chilling enemies for 14%. When Deep Freeze expires, it deals an additional 100% damage. Casting Deep Freeze again ends its effect early. We also have Prime Deep Freeze. When Deep Freeze ends, gain 10% of your base life as a barrier for 6 seconds for each enemy you froze while it was active. Supreme Deep Freeze. When Deep Freeze ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%. Then we have Inferno, which summon a fiery serpent that continually constricts the target area, burning enemies for 1,009 damage, 295% damage over 8 seconds. It's a huge serpent that coils around you like you're freaking Sasuke from Naruto, and he's doing a Susanoo, and it like coils around you and pulses, and it does some pretty decent damage to the monsters around you. Inferno repeatedly pulls enemies to its center, which is a good way to cluster enemies. And then on top of that, while Inferno is active, your pyromancy skills cost no mana, so you get to spam them. Unstable Currents was a really fun one. I played around with this one a lot. Lightning surges within you for 10 seconds. Whenever you cast any shock skills, a random core, conjunction, conjuration, or mastery skill shock skill is also cast. So basically your goal here when you cast Unstable Currents is just to spam the ever-loving poo-poo out of whatever ability you can to cause all of the other abilities from the lightning tree to also cast in return. And it makes for some pretty amazing stuff, because you'll have like chain lightnings and shock, charged bolts and ball lightnings and stuff going all over the place, and it does some pretty significant damage output. You can enhance it by increasing your attack speed by 25%, which is what I would recommend, because the faster you can attack, the more of the effects will happen. In 10 seconds, you basically want to attack as many times as you possibly can to get as many effects as you can to go off. Supreme Unstable Currents. While Unstable Currents is active, crackling energy continually pulses and consumes no charges. Then we're left with the capstones. Now, unlike some of the other classes that only have one capstone per kind of like direction, the sorceress has two capstones per direction. Two capstones of fire, two capstones of lightning, and two capstones of ice. One of the first ice capstone is your frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast of ice shards, frozen orb, or blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage, chances doubled against vulnerable enemies. These passives are actually kind of interesting, and I have seen legendaries that enhance them. We also have Shatter, which is after freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of the damage you dealt to them while frozen. This one's actually pretty cool because if you're going with a freezing build, you can get some pretty good damage output that way. For the lightning tree, we got Overflowing Energy, which is crackling energy hits one additional enemy each time crackling energy hits an enemy. Your shock skills cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 seconds, increased to 0.25 seconds against elites. Or Verve's Mastery, close enemies take 10% increased damage from your shock skills and deal 20% less damage to you. Critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. On the fire side of the tree, we have Combustion. Your burning effects deal 2% increased damage per unique source of burning you have applied to the enemy. If the enemy is burning from 3 or more sources, this bonus is doubled. And believe me or not, there's a lot of burning sources. Esu's Ferocity, your fire critical strike damage is increased by 25% against enemies above 50% life. Your fire critical strike chance is increased by 5% against enemies below 50% life. Killing an enemy with a critical strike grants both bonuses against all enemies for 3 seconds. So as you can see, the Sorceress has some pretty crazy ways that she can build her character, and of course you can mix and match abilities. You don't have to go with pure fire, pure ice, or pure lightning. You can mix and match to your heart's content. Defensive abilities, honestly, both Flame Shield and Ice Armor are pretty darn good, and Teleport is more of a movement ability. I wouldn't necessarily call Frost Nova a defensive ability. I figure it's more of a utilitarian skill. So far, the Sorceress is shining up to be a very amazing character. Although do keep in mind that recently she received quite the nerf in her survivability because she was honestly just way too tanky in the beta. She's definitely a lot more squishy now, but you know, with the proper cooldown abilities, she seems to still do just fine. Last thing, I guess, is let's go over all the enchantment abilities, because I think that's pretty cool, and we'll talk about those real quick. So, Unstable Currents, these are all ultimates, so these don't count. Ball Lightning has Lucky Hit. Critical strikes have a 25% chance to spawn a static Ball Lightning. We have Lucky Hit up to an 8% chance for a Meteor to fall on enemies from Meteor. Blizzard has every 15 seconds a blizzard forms over you and follows you for 6 seconds. Firewall, each time an enemy takes burning damage, there's a 5% chance to spawn 2 firewalls underneath of them for 3 seconds. Lightning Spear, absorbing crackling enemy has 10% chance to conjure a Lightning Spear. Hydras, after spending 300 mana, a 5-headed Hydra spawns for 5 seconds. Ice Blades, for every 40 seconds in cooldowns you spend, you spawn an Ice Blades on the random enemy. Teleport, Evade is replaced with a short range teleport on a 17-second cooldown. Ice Armor, upon getting hit, you have a 5% chance to apply Ice Armor to yourself, which is pretty cool. Frost Nova, Lucky Hit, your conjuration skills have up to a 30% chance to unleash a Frost Nova when hitting enemies. Flame Shield automatically activates when you take fatal damage. Can only happen once every 120 seconds. Frozen Orb, whenever you cast non-basic skills, you have a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. Incinerate, every 18 seconds a Serpent spawns and incinerates enemies for 8 seconds. Charged Bolt, when you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release 3 charged bolts from them. Chain Lightning forms automatically after spending 100 mana. Ice Shards automatically conjure and fly toward frozen enemies. Fireball, when you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. Arc Lash, when you use a cooldown, enemies around you are stunned for 0.5 seconds. Direct damage from skills applies up to 15% chill on Frostbolt. So that's pretty powerful. Firebolt. Direct damage from skills applies up to a additional 112 burning damage over 8 seconds. Spark. Killing an enemy has a 10% chance to form a crackling energy. And of course, you can choose 2 of those enchantments. So there's almost like a crazy ass number of ways that you could potentially mix and match all of these abilities within 2 specific slots. And I can already think of some pretty interesting combinations just looking at the skills right now. This one right here, Frostbolt, direct damage from skills applies up to a 15% chill. Seems like it would work really good with a character who's trying to freeze all targets. That way, like, anytime you're dishing out damage, you're also getting a 15% chill on top of it, which would probably also stack with other chilling effects, which means that the monsters would be frozen more often, and as we saw going through the tree, freezing effects have a huge effect on the damage output of your character. I think that's pretty much it for the Sorceress, and as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when it's just a 30-minute video going over the Diablo 4 Sorceress. And as always, keep watching.